Hey everybody, it's Gavin Seim here today to talk about Lumist 2. And in today's more advanced video, we're going to look into the nuances of how to go deeper with Lumist. If you're watching this, you probably will want to have watched the first Lumist 2 video, the Getting Started Quick Start video, because it covers a lot of the fundamentals of using Lumist, as well as the new features and things like that in Lumist 2. But if you're already familiar with Lumist, you're going to love this video because we're going to get into some of the nuances of really using Lumist and the simplicity of how Lumist 2 can help us control light and tone and color and retouching. So let's actually swing over here. I already have a portrait loaded. We actually glanced at this one briefly before, and I have a few things done. I have my map built, and so I can just hide my map. If you've watched the first video, you already know how to install Lumist and use button mode and just quickly get in and make it work. Saunder's face looks good. I like this hair spilling across. We could do a little bit of cloning, retouching on the stray hairs and stuff like that, but we're gonna focus right now on just the color and the tone. Now, one of the things I can do is bring a little pop, right? I could do something like depth surround, and I don't even need to make a selection. I can just let it do its magic and let the depth surround layer go, or I can do luminance. And I can limit these like we talked about in the original workshop. I don't really want to be lightening up these areas. So let's actually show the map. And I'm going to take like the 7, 8, 9 range. Okay, I'm going to hide the map again. Let me go up to my tone select. I'm going to take 7, 8, 9, and 10. And feather that a little bit. And I'm going to go to this luminance effect that I just applied, and I'm just going to use the new subtract selection. This is really handy because I can just go boom and remove that effect from those areas there. And look, the face is looking good. We got a catchlight here in the eye. It's a nice image, but we really need to control these tones a little bit. There's a couple ways we could do that. One of the things I try to encourage people with Lumist is it's a tool to help us get better results on our images, but also to help us understand light more and know how to work with it. And back to the original intent of Lumist when we first started making it was just a deeper understanding of what's going on. So we can see over on the left here, we have some darker tones, 3s and 4s. Up toward the sky, it's getting a little bright, but we're not clipping into the pure whites. And then we have a lot of space over here on the right. Now we could crop this at the end, but usually I don't do much cropping until I'm done with the main process, just in case I want that space. I have these 6s and 7s mostly here, but you'll notice that if I select the 6s and the 7s, I'm kind of getting her face in there too. But there is an angle here. I'm gonna take the 6s and 7s and feather those. And let's actually use a blank levels layer. So I'm just going to go to the simple toolbox and use the blank levels layer. And I'm going to click on the layer and edit it directly now. And so you can see that we're only editing those 6s and 7s. Okay? So I'm going to darken this background down a bit. I could use burn and dodge. We'll look at that as well. But I'm just going to darken this down and kind of bring it into the shadows a little more so that her surrounding area. Now, there's a couple ways I could do this now. I'm darkening her face a bit much. One way to do this would be to use the new skin tone select, okay? So select the skin tones, there we are, let's feather them, and I'm still on my levels layer. Let's just subtract my selection from the mask. Okay, so I've just restored her skin tones to this. The other way, of course, would be to manually modify the mask. And don't be afraid, sometimes it really is just quicker to take a brush. So shortcut for that is B. I usually go BDX. B selects the brush, D resets my swatches, and X flips them. So if I want to paint in the mask, right, I now have white as my background color. White reveals, black conceals. So if I paint white, I'm actually bringing in the mask. If I paint black, I'm masking it away. I got that completely backwards. I have no idea what's going on here. Just cut that part. Okay, so I can just take my brush and use black or white respectively. Let me soften the edges of my brush here a little bit to paint in this layer more or paint it out more. And I can do this with various layers to make sure I maintain the correct amount of detail, right? I don't want to lose the detail I'm actually going to paint out a little bit in her hair, right? I can go to my custom levels layer and I can really paint in the contrast in these areas up here, revealing that contrasty. White reveals, black conceals, and you can see that I'm just painting. So I'm doing the same thing as Lumist does when it masks. I'm just doing it manually with a brush. And there's going to be times where if you have a large area, it's just really efficient just to brush it in. And there's a lot of times where you're going to want to select those specific tones. So don't be afraid just to use the native tools in Photoshop, but I still want to make her pop. Had I had a strobe in this scene, I could have put a little more light on her, and maybe this image actually would have been a little more naturally poppy, would have given a completely different look. There's nothing wrong with a natural light look, but we should never be afraid to use a strobe. And again, this is something that by being able to see all these tones, I really kind of think, well, hey, if I had strobed her, I could have kept her face in zone 6 and 7 and pushed the background down a little bit. Well, I didn't, so what do I have to work with? Well, let's use the new non-destructive burn and dodge layer. I'm just going to click this. And by default, this does nothing. So it's important to know that if you're confused, it does nothing because this is a neutral burn and dodge layer. So I can actually now select my burn and dodge tool. And what I can do is a non-destructive layer. I didn't have to make a rasterized layer. This is a middle gray layer, and I can simply paint burning and dodging. And I still have all the normal burn and dodge tools that I talk about in other workshops. I can just burn shadows. I can select the exposure of my burn. And I'm doing that all on this gray layer here without actually affecting a layer in a destructive way. So I'm going to kind of bring some shadows, and you can see it. I do a lot of burn and dodging on images. I talk about it a lot. Advanced selections and all that are great, but sometimes you just want to darken down a little bit, and you can do that beautifully with here. I can just darken, and you can see I'm using a big brush. It's really soft. I'm selecting midtones, shadows. I can adjust the amount. I can burn the highlights a little bit. Be careful with this one. It's easy to go too far. And we can just kind of burn this in, and then I can switch to dodge. I can go right up here, and this is just a native Photoshop tool. And I guess what I'm emphasizing here is if you mix your Lumist tools with those native tools, it's going to give you a lot of power. So I'm going to kind of dodge her face a little bit. I'm going to dodge the shadows a bit and kind of bring a little bit of detail back into this hair down here. And I'm making fairly minimal edits here. I'm just kind of thinking, okay, how do I want this to look? But it's not so minimal. We've actually done quite a bit to this image to bring it out. And that's a really powerful thing because this is all non-destructive. There's just a layer here, and you could move it around, you can move it up a layer, and it's going to have this effect on anything below it. You could also mask this layer. So if you did a burn and dodge layer, you could then make a selection from Lumist and then restrict that. So let's say I only wanted to apply that to a certain area. I could go like this, make the selection manually here in this case, and just say remask, and it's going to mask that layer to my selection. In this case, I want my original intent. I'm going to click that same action, remask, and it's going to clear that to a fully visible or reveal all selection. So these are things you're going to see as you're going through Lumist as well. You have a lot of little tools that are meant just to make it simple, that are meant to blend naturally with Photoshop's native tools. And you also have a lot of things. Get into that simple toolbox. We try to name these. I try to make them as simple as possible, but just look at what they say, right? Feather, smooth the current mask is what we use to feather the current mask. Make a selection from the mask. Remask. This is a handy one because you can remask to the new selection. So it's going to update your mask to your current selection. Or if there is no selection, it's just going to clear your mask and reveal all. Add selection to mask. Subtract selection. These are things we didn't have in Lumist 1, and they just make it really nice because I can just quickly take a tool like this and say, oh, let's go here and make a manual selection, right? I didn't even use Lumist to make the initial selection, but I can still use the feather tool in Lumist, which will actually then give me a preview of my selection, and then I can say, well, subtract that selection from the current mask. There's so many things that you can do here, and it really makes for a powerful effect. Let's actually take a look. Throw the map up there again. And again, we've really brought down the tones over here. At this point, I might say, well, hold on, let's hide that map. And let's go down to my Luma painters, and let's actually paint in some of this sky, kind of bring some warmth, right? So let's go to the sun gold overlay, okay? So we're bringing some warmth, but I don't want this everywhere. So I'm gonna take 8, 9, and 10, okay? And I'm just gonna select those. Let's take 7 too, all right? And then I'm gonna feather by 50, and I'm gonna retroactively apply that mask using the remask button, which again applies the current selection to my sun overlay layer here, and just like that, I've limited this a lot more. So now I'm adding some warmth to those highlights, and I'm just gonna actually manually brush it out of her face here, because we don't really need it. I could use the skin tone selection and subtract it, but it's very quick just to use the brush in this case, okay? And so one of the things I'll often do, and this is kind of an advanced tip in Lumist, and why we've made it so easy to mask, remask, adjust a mask and a selection, is that I can say, well, hold on, I want to see what an effect does to an image. So I might say, let's do a green Luma overlay, right? And I'm like, hey, that looks cool on the foliage, right? It kind of makes my background look a little more natural, but I don't want her skin to be green. So now I can say, all right, that's cool. Let's do a skin tone select from the tone tools. Let's feather that a little. And I'm just gonna now subtract that selection so that those greens are not selecting her face. And you can see in a way we're kind of darkening the image, we're separating her a bit, and we're also giving that foliage a more natural look. You also have the Luma Painter modifiers. And these are basically just shortcuts that change the blending mode of these paint overlays. So I can make paint soft, which is the default, make paint dark. This is something that you would use with low opacities, or as like a pixel paint. So let's say you were painting in on highlights, you might make paint dark, which is gonna darken everything overall, but it also makes the paint overlay a lot more intense. But it can be very handy. The beauty is you can quickly switch between these. Make paint heavy. I'm gonna go back to make paint soft. There's a reason we default to that one. And you can of course play with the blending modes on any given layer yourself. I try to make actions to encourage us to use Photoshop's native tools, blending modes, brushes, things like that. I don't try and hide from you guys what's going on. So at any time you can edit a layer, you can change its blending mode, you can change its opacity. That's why I don't flatten layers and why everything's building up in vertical, so that you can kind of roll out any group and adjust the layers within it. So you could take an effect like Luminesque, and then you can go in and you'll see a lot of times I'll put plus and minus on layers that are intended to be edited, right? So if you see a plus and minus, you can play with any layer. But if there's a plus and minus, what I'm doing is I'm hinting that, hey, play with the opacity on this. Turn this layer on and off and see if you like it. And this way you can get truly infinite effects, all right? So you don't have to use those. You can ignore them. You can do the quick mode, one click, go for it. But if you want to kind of drill in a little deeper and get a little more advanced, you can. Now, another thing here is you can take a layer like the paint overlays. You'll notice that these are just color overlays, and then we're using selections and blending modes to make them beautiful. So you might say, hey, I like this green overlay, but I want to make it a little bit different green. Select the RGB, meaning not the mask. This is the mask. Select the RGB part of your layer, and then you can click and choose a new background color. And you might just want to change the green, for example. And so I'm going to just fill that. And I've just changed the green in that layer, okay? And I could also we could use the fill command and do the same thing, or as I do, use its corresponding shortcut. But here we go right here, edit, fill. And if we do it this way, we can select any color we want. The quickest way to fill is just to select a background color and command delete on the Mac. And that would be control delete or control backspace, I believe, on the PC. And there we go. Let's turn the opacity down to this. I just want to add a little bit of green. You can see what it's doing. It's taking a little bit of that yellowy magenta and adding some green, but again, mostly leaving her face alone, which is really nice. Okay, so when you're editing an image, the ultimate goal here is to say, well, what's our end game? What do we want it to look like? How do we want those tones to pop? This one's looking pretty nice. Let's actually go though down here to Lumicolor one clicks, and let's use the hair shadow light. I'm gonna run this. Now you can notice, you'll see that this lightened everything because I didn't have a selection. This works as a one click. It can be a great brightener effect. It doesn't just have to be used for hair, but I called it hair shadow light because it was kind of geared towards bringing detail and maintaining detail in the hair. So in this case, what I'm going to do is look at my map, and I'm going to say, well, let's only apply this to those deep shadows, right? Let's do 0 and 1. I'm going to hide my map, select zone 0, select zone 1, feather, and remask to that selection, okay? So now this is only affecting the shadows. It's affecting some of my other shadows, but it's not a problem here because really it's bringing back some of my blacks across the image and some detail into that hair, which is really nice, okay? So we could just keep going. I could use ghost lights, right? I've talked about this in the basic workshop, but it's important to kind of reiterate, one clicks are geared towards working well across the whole image, which is in no way to say that you should not mask them. One clicks also have a lot of layers inside typically, not always, but usually you'll see layers where you can go in and you can change opacities or turn layers on and off to radically alter that effect. Okay, Ghost Lights is kind of a little bit of a soft overlay, but it actually retains detail really well. In some scenes, this is just beautiful. I feel like overall, though, we're getting a little bit too bright here. So I'm actually just going to do a darken curve, and I've made no selection, so it's going to apply that globally. All right, now I'm going to click on it. It's a little too dark, and I'm just going to play with that curve a little bit. I'm going to keep my shadows rich, keep my midtones alive, but pull down my highlights just a little bit, not too much. It's easy to go over the top here on a global edit. And then I'm going to dial the opacity back. Okay? So again, just bringing a little bit of pop and contrast into this. I'm just going to use the darken edges, which is kind of a little vignette. Again, now we're drawing focus a little bit, but let's make it softer. Again, you can see it's a mask. Anytime you see a mask, I can use mask tools that are in the simple toolbox, like smooth current layer, to just continue softening. Bear in mind with smooth current layer, this is basically like adding a 25 pixel feather. And the way it's doing that is by blurring the mask. But there's no limit to how many times I can do it. So if I click it 5 times, well, I've just added 125 pixels of feather to that mask. Ghost Lights is doing interesting stuff here. This is a very unique effect that actually is intelligent. It uses the pixels in the image. It uses duplicates of the image, shifting those to give us a really good kind of overlay. But you notice how it's kind of putting a stripe right here through the middle that's too dark. I'm going to click on my mask, and I'm just going to, remember, white conceals, black reveals. I got that backwards. Black conceals, white reveals. And I'm just going to hide this a little bit to balance out those tones the way I like them from the Ghost Lights. Okay, we have a really nice image here, and we can take a couple more minutes though. Let's actually switch this around and go over to another landscape. And so here, I've showed you guys probably this image in some other videos. It's one of my favorites from down the Oregon coast. But let's look at some of the nuances. This has had a basic raw process, but not a lot has been done to this. Let's go ahead and build a map real quick. One really handy thing is we've now put a build map, show map, and hide map, a repeat of those right in the middle of everything. I just accidentally built 2 maps, so I'm going to delete that one. Okay, but this makes it so you don't have to scroll to the top to build a map. But frankly, once you build the map, you're not going to have to interact with it too much, because in Lumist 1, we had to refresh the map all the time. Everything, again, is in real time now. So if I make a change, I turn on the map. I can even edit with the map on. So I can look at this. Let's actually do that. Let's go to a curves layer. I'm going to do a blank curves layer. And obviously, it's not going to do anything because it's a blank layer. I'm going to show my map again. Most of the actions, when they run, they will automatically hide the map so you can see the effect that they're having on your image. But all you got to do is click Show Map to bring that back. Now what I want to do, I'm not actually clipping into the whites, so I'm not looking bad here, but this is still very hot up here. So I'm actually going to take, I could select and limit this to just zone 9 and 10, which is what we're looking at, orange and red, but without any white clippings, okay? In this case though, I'm just going to take this and I'm going to watch the map in real time. And let's watch what happens. I'm going to pull down the highlights and we're going to see those change in real time. That map is going to update. So I can actually say, well, where do I want them? Let's put the highlights all the way and maintain them in 9. But I don't want everything else to darken. So I'm going to click the curve and I'm going to keep everything else pretty bright, but just bring down those highlights a little bit. And see the beauty of this. This is something we could never do without the Lumist map because we're going visually. Now I'm actually seeing, we could do this manually, we could guess at it, but I get to see in real time, you guys, what tone value. And I can look and say, okay, now my highest highlights are in zone 9. And let's look at my shadows. I'm clipping a few shadows into pure black, right? So you see the red, that's zone 0, and you see the black, that's the bottom 20% of zone 0. So effectively it's clipped black. I don't mind a little bit of clipped black in my images. So that's totally fine with me. What I'm going to do is take the shadow ranges and darken those a little. Now watch what happens here. I'm darkening my shadows to bring some pop, and you can see that it's really kind of affecting my 3s, 4s, and 5s. But I don't want to put a bunch more shadow clipping in, so I'm darkening a little bit, but I'm gonna recover a little bit of those shadows. Be careful when you're working with the extremes of a curve, because it will make it look crazy really fast. Look at how quickly I can take away all that shadow. Well, look, if I had the map, it's turning it to mush. We don't want that, okay? So I'm just gonna use a little bit, bring up the tail end of those shadows to keep myself from clipping, but to keep some richness in the shadows. Interesting curve there. Let's hide that and see what we've done. Okay? The highlights are looking really good. The shadows are honestly too much, so I'm just going to bring it up a little bit. I want to retain some detail in those shadows. I don't want to turn it to mush, but I don't want it to be all clipping in there. And if you look at my map, it's looking really good. We're really not even clipping into black. We're in zone 0 to zone 9. And this is a beautiful thing here. I talk about this in some of my workshops and stuff. Use the tonal range. It's a phenomenal thing to use the tonal range. I love it when I have an image that encompasses zone 0 to zone 10. So what are we doing? We're getting rich contrast. We're getting a lot of dynamic range. This has a ton of dynamic range taken on an A7R2 from a single raw file. And there's a lot of dynamic range in that file, but it was exposed ideally so that I was able to pull back the highlights and pull it up the shadows to really keep that full tonal range. Does every image need to have zone 0 to zone 10? No. But sometimes when we're not seeing visually, and this is what zones and tones and Lumist helps us to do, when you don't see tones visually, sometimes you have a tendency to crunch things into the midtones. It's okay to use the whole tonal range. It's a beautiful thing. Okay, so what else we can do? All I've done is added a curve to this, and I've added a little bit of pop, but I want to do something with this sky. Let me show that map again. I'm going to take these highlight tones, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is take 7, 8, and 9, which is a lot of my highlights in that sky, all right? Just going to hide the map, and I'm going to take 7, 8, and 9, and I'm going to feather that by 25. Now I'm going to add fire paint overlay onto this, and see what that's doing. It's just bringing kind of that rich orangeness into the sky a little bit more. It's bringing me more of what I want in the sky. It's also putting it down though in the foreground, and I really just want this in the sky, so there's a really fast way to change that. In Lumist 1, there was we didn't have as many tools to quickly adjust this. You could mask it, you could paint it in. All I gotta do here though is make a selection of the whole bottom half. I'm gonna feather that by 50 so it's nice and soft. And I'm just gonna take my fire overlay layer and subtract. And it's just gonna remove that. So now it's just limited to where this is only affecting the sky, and I can add more opacity. So it's kind of bringing up my saturation, but it's also actually doing a paint layer. And you can see that I could change the modes of this. Heavy is way too much. It looks like I just splattered crayon all over it. In this case, soft light. Soft light, the reason we use soft light so much on these kind of layers is because it doesn't affect the contrast much, and it allows the color of whatever you're painting to show through, but it doesn't destroy the detail. It doesn't just mush it up like if you just painted an opaque brush over the top of it. So now that sky is looking really good. What else can I do? Honestly, guys, I really will just play with things. And some of the most advanced things that you can do in an image and refining and editing an image is just trying things. It's okay to run a layer. And usually when I'm doing this, I won't make a selection. Even if it's a Luma painter or something that I might need to limit to a certain area, I won't make a selection. I will run it globally to see how it looks on that image, okay? And then I might come in here. See all these layers? This one says optional. What does this do? Here's an optional layer. Here's the color balance of these, so I can adjust this to determine how much I want this effect to alter the color, the Luma balance. I can make this effect have 100 different variations in just a few minutes, and that's the beauty of all these layers. Now, I don't want to lose detail in this. Ghost lights is kind of neat here on this landscape, but I'm just going to use a little bit of it just to kind of bring out a little bit of that ethereal feel, the misty feel to this image, but I'm really going to dial that back to like 30%, okay? And what else can I do? There's all kinds of things I could do. Luma rays, let's see what those do. Wow, that's interesting. It's a little bit too much for this one because I've already got a lot of contrast, but that's pretty cool. 3D backlighter. A lot of these Lumacolor one-clicks are doing things that are really neat because they're selecting specific tones and zones. So you can see how it's really bringing detail into my foreground, maybe a little bit too much into my sky though. I want to maintain that dynamic range. So let's do what we did a minute ago, but in reverse. I'm going to select my sky and I'm going to feather by 50. And I'm going to take that 3D backlighter effect and just subtract it so it doesn't affect the sky. Now it's only affecting the foreground. And wow, this is getting to be a beautiful image. Let's actually just look. Let's kind of see what we've done. I'm going to select all of these and just group them. I like to do that to see my before and after because I can see what I've done to an image. I can also have stacked 10 or 20 different actions I've ran, select them all, Command G or Control G, put them in a group, and now I can adjust. So let's say I've done all these effects and I'm like, wow, it's really cool, but it's kind of intense. I just want to dial back everything. That's the beauty of this vertical, non-destructive editing environment that we've built within sets like Lumist and Alchemist. And so you can see the image looked good as it was. It had a nice process out of Lightroom or Capture One or wherever I brought this out of, but we're just adding to it. And we can just keep going up. So I could just keep adding. I could say, well, let's add a blue cross. That's kind of interesting, but intense. I definitely don't want that across the whole image. Let's only put that in zone 2, and then feather, and then remask this to limit this. So now I've got this weird kind of crossy blue effect that's way too much here, and I'm just going to put a little tiny bit of this in to just subtly adjust the blue color. But let's look at that water. Okay, I have all this water. Now, there's two ways I could do this. I could select the tones, but remember that Lumist is not just luminosity masking and selecting tones. It's the ability to be able to interact with selections and masks and combine those with effects. Okay, so let's go ahead and take this a little further by thinking outside just the norms of clicking buttons. Let's actually go here. I want to look at the well. Now, I could look at this. Let's show the map. I could say, well, all right, we have the well, and it's mostly, well, it's in a lot of ranges because there's a lot of really beautiful gradients in this water. So I want to do something with this water, but it's important to not get stuck in a rut. And one of the things that's beautiful about Lumist is you can take any selection, and all the Lumist tools work. So we can build groups like Luma groups that address midtones, highlights, and shadows. We can target specific zones, but we can also just think simple. I'm just going to take the lasso, and I'm going to make a simple selection around this, and then I'm going to feather it by 50 twice. So now I have 100 pixels of feather here, okay? The first thing I want to do is I want to affect this water a little bit. So I'm actually going to use a blank levels layer. I love the simplicity of levels. And sometimes I'll use curves if I want more advanced specific control. Some people love levels for everything, but the bottom line is here, I can do a lot with these levels. Let's double click that, bring up the properties of this. Now you can see that despite the fact that that selection I made was not specifically from Tone Tools or any of these buttons, Lumist recognized the selection, it feathered it, and when I ran the blank curve layer, it simply applied those levels. What I want to do is bring up the water a bit, okay? I really want to have the texture. I like kind of the misty, ethereal feel to this image, but I'm going to darken the darks a little bit, bringing the blacks up from the left. I'm going to darken the midtones a bit here, okay? Just darkening the whole thing. And then I'm going to bring up those highlights just to kind of separate that water just a little bit. Now here's one of the handy things, and something that's new in actually Lumist 2.1. We've done this, but I say, okay, I've done the contrast. What else can I do? I want to do some more stuff to that same area. I'm simply going to make selection from mask with a single click. Okay, so I've just made a new selection that's exactly the same as that mask, and I'm going to apply it to something new. So let me go here and let's actually use Simple Saturate. And this actually saturates it more, which is the wrong direction. But again, this is a non-destructive adjustment layer. So I'm just going to come in here, and instead of saturating, I'm going to drag it the other way and kind of desaturate. Not too much. I still want the blue of the water, but I don't want it to feel unnatural, okay? So we're going to dial back. One of the things I love about this image is the warm and cool. Warm and cool is such a beautiful combination on an image. And so we don't have to overdo that here. I'm going to dial that back, but now I'm going to do this again. Let's repeat that. Make selection from mask, okay? And I'm going to go down to a completely different action set. Let me actually deselect that. I've got an idea. So let's kind of look at how we can use the tools in Lumist, but even step outside of Lumist. I'm going to go down in my actions here, and I'm going to go to the Alchemist actions. Alchemist has a lot of really cool tools for detail and retouching skin and advanced retouching. While it doesn't directly talk to Lumist, it still works beautifully side by side with Lumist. I'm going to run the structure brush here. And this is one of the Alchemist brushes. So you can see that by default, it's not doing anything. What I'm going to do is go back. Remember that selection we just made around the well? I'm going to select that layer. And let's just make selection from mask. So again, I'm making that selection again. And I'm going to take that brush in structure, and I'm going to go remask, which is going to apply that exact same mask to this. Now, sure, I could have brushed it in this case, but I could have done this, taken an effect from another action, taken an effect that I made myself, a layer, a group, anything, and I could simply take an advanced selection, a basic selection, a selection from another layer that I did earlier, made it into a selection from the mask, and then quickly just remask my layer that wasn't even made from Lumist. And now I'm actually going to control that. This brings a lot of, much more than just sharpening. This is like a textural. It's almost like a clarity. And I'm just going to run this fairly low opacity, but you can see that I'm definitely bringing some detail into the water as it pours into the well there. And I really like that. Let's actually go and kind of group all these together and just look at a before and after. You can see how much we've done to this in just a few minutes. And it started out as a great image, but you know what? This goes back, and Lumist, I think, really helps to incite this idea, right? We can come in here and we can do tone selects. We got the simple toolbox for basic things from curves to exposure, Luma painters for color and light overlays, one clicks, allowing us to have really cool effects, but also to limit those effects to exactly where on the image we want them. We come down to silver elements. You'll notice there's not a ton of silver tools in here because we don't need a ton of silver tools. These convert the image, but then we still have all the Luma tools. One of the things I learned in studying the masters of black and white is that silver is all about the tone, and it taught me a lot about color because I started realizing, remember what I mentioned earlier, using the whole toner range, using zone 0 to zone 10, seeing the zones, visualizing in camera, understanding zones and how we can expose specifically with those zones and how we can use ratios and put the background in one zone and the subject in another zone. Being able to see those zones in Lumist in real time now in Lumist 2 is an amazing tool because it not only helps us edit, it helps us connect better with those zones and with that light. And that's a really powerful thing. And so when you think about black and white, a lot of my users, including myself, are doing their primary black and white conversions mostly on the raw file in Lightroom and Capture One because we have the nuances of all the color channels and all the information of the raw file. It's a great place to do a black and white conversion. That said, we introduced the black and white conversions with various textures and detail to them into Lumist to really streamline that process. So maybe you like to convert your black and white in Photoshop. You can now do that just like that in Lumist, and you can use these really powerful silver conversion tools. But the real power is that you can then come up and you can say, okay, let's analyze the tones. Let's look at our values. Let's bring in that tonal range. There certainly shouldn't be a rule that you have to use the entire range from black to white. But when I realized that the masters, not only of painting, but of black and white photography in the early days, they weren't crunching everything into the midtones. The tonal range, and my late mentor, Ken Whitmire, really taught me about using tonal range to make an image three-dimensional and to really make it pop off the page. And so the more I utilize the whole tonal range, oftentimes the more richness I will get. Not just for the sake of it, bringing up the blacks into blackness and the lights into lightness, but using that correctly, seeing those zones. And I think with Lumist users, it not only helps us edit, but I know for me, it helps me understand better what's going on with tone. It helps me visualize better when I'm in camera. And of course, the better image we make in camera, the better image we make in the post-production. Because if you start with a really good image, you're going to end up with a great image. This image looks great in color though, so I'm going to go ahead and take away the black and white group that we put on this. But just remember, don't be afraid to dig into those black and whites, the silver elements, and of course, really use the Lumist tone tools to make your black and white shine. And also don't be afraid to take the concepts of using your tonal range over to color. Black and white's an inherently colorless world, right? It's all about the tone. And so it's easier to come over to color and be kind of drawn in by the color and forget that the tone is still just as relevant in a color image. It just works. Sometimes we use it a little differently, but the ability to use that whole tonal range, understanding contrast and tone and richness, and being able to use Lumist to control those is a very powerful thing. So guys, I think we've covered a lot of this. Lumist is an incredibly advanced collection of tools. And it is actions, and sometimes people look down on actions, but I've never seen actions that have this level of intricacy and complexity. And I don't know of any tool that we have that can do what this does. You know, if you go down to the bottom, you'll see the support files. Generally, you should leave those alone. But sometimes when you run an action in Lumist, there's 1, 2, 3 other actions running just like that. You don't even see it within that action that's allowing you to have all these controls and for it just to work. Lumist helps us make the light sing, and it just works. And that's what we're going to keep updating. We're going to keep making it better. We're going to keep improving, looking for ways to make it faster and more efficient, to make it more fluid, because the goal is not to say, here's simply a collection of effects and you can have a cool look on your image. The goal is to make working with tone and light and color easier for you. And I think our users are thinking the same thing from the feedback I'm getting. That's exactly what Lumist is doing. There's nothing like this. It's like the missing feature of our digital darkroom, and it brings together, ties all those loose ends up, and lets us really finish the image exactly the way we want. Don't be afraid just to apply things. Don't be afraid to play with the overlays and the different effects, to apply them globally and then maybe limit them to a specific zone or a specific color range in the image, or your manual selection. Don't be afraid to use the native tools like the opacity, the layer opacity, the brushes on your masks. Black conceals, white reveals. Don't be afraid to dig in and really put that stuff to work. Lumist is designed to help you use Photoshop better. It's designed to help you understand light better in camera. Most of all, it's just designed to let there be light and let it be amazing. And I think you guys are going to do great with it. Let me know if you have any questions. We are here to help. Let me know if there's features or improvements or things or ways that you think we can make Lumist better as we keep improving it going forward. And please tell your friends about it. This is a powerful tool that anyone using Photoshop, I think, should have at their fingertips. Enjoy, you guys. Peace.